Hi everybody, my name is Sarah Ockwell-Smith. Welcome to my latest SOS parenting video. Now, my new book, How to Be a Calm Parent, is out next week, so I wanted to talk to you about one of the very first topics that I discuss in that, and that's what happened to us in our childhood and how that can impact on us as parents and how, well, it impacts on everything really, but especially the interactions we have with our children. Now, one thing I talk about in the introduction to the book, in a chapter called Shadows from the Nursery, is this idea of if you were a good child, if you were a responsible kind of caregiver, good child. This very much applies to me. I'm an only child and my mum struggled with her mental and physical health during my childhood. So I very much sort of took on the role, I guess, of caregiver. As she was older and she was sicker, then I very much was doing manual caregiving. But when she was younger, I very quickly learned that my mum was calmer and happier, and my whole family was in general if I was good, if I was quiet. So what does it mean to be a good child? Surely in our society that's something we all aim for when we're raising children. We want them to be good. But actually, if we really kind of dissect what society means about having a good child, what they really mean is a quiet child, a child who doesn't cause too much difficulty, a child who doesn't have sort of big uncontrollable emotions, a child who's compliant, a child who does what they're told when they're told and really doesn't sort of make much fuss. Now, this might seem a great idea, and certainly if you're listening and you've got children, you're probably thinking, yeah, I'd quite like one of those good children. But when you are that good child yourself, what happens is from a very young age, you learn to keep your emotions inside because it's easier for your parents if you don't have those big exploding emotions because they're probably struggling with something else. So you learn to be very self-sufficient. And I think for me, that was something that went along with being an only child as well. I didn't have other children around, and I learned to kind of rely on myself for company, I guess, as well as sort of everything else. So I became very self-sufficient, very self-reliant, very good. I sort of kept most of my emotions to myself. Obviously not at all times. I was a child, I was a teenager, I was a very sulky teenager. But what I very quickly learned is if I kept those emotions deep inside of me and I was good and I portrayed this kind of compliant, good little girl, caregiver type role, that it made things easier for my parents. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not implying that my parents were bad people. They were incredibly loving people. I had a great relationship with them aside from this. But, this is almost something that I did to myself. It was sort of forced upon me. But I carried that with me into my teenage years and then into adulthood. And what it meant for me as I had my own children is that I think to most people, I seem quite mature and I seem like I really have it all together and I seem quite kind of calm and this whole parenting expert persona. But what was basically happening is I wasn't dealing with these feelings. They were sort of buried beneath me because I didn't want to let them out in front of my children. And, I went from one caregiver role to another caregiver role, caregiver to my parents to caregiver to my children. And these emotions kind of stayed buried. And there's only so long you can bury emotions for, right? And then they explode. So for me, I tried really hard. And then the more stressed and sleep deprived I became, the more kids I had and the more just exhausting it was, the more I became prone to sort of volcanic type eruptions because these feelings weren't being dealt with. They were just being buried, and you can't bury them for a whole heap of time. And the other sort of impact of my childhood was that self-reliance that I spoke to you about, and the idea that I really struggled to ask for help. So I'm kind of like in the worst of both worlds. I was a terrible people pleaser. I always took on sort of extra tasks if I thought it would make people happy because I grew up pleasing people. And basically what it led to was an increasing level of burnout and stress as a parent, which I've realised over the last few years is just unsustainable. So when in How to Be a Calm Parent, I talk about understanding our own upbringings and the sort of what it can leave us with, what we bring into parenthood. And for me, the biggest revelation has been just basically letting it out and just realising that I have these feelings and I need to work through them and I need to understand them and I need to just let go of some stuff. And I also need to let other people help me, which is something I think I've never really experienced. So it was something I was reluctant to do, but absolutely for me to be calmer, that was one of my biggest obstacles. By no means my own. If you know, my book is very much a guide book for parents with lots of tips on how to be calmer and how to just feel more peaceful and happier in general, but it's quite autobiographical as well, and I sort of talk you through the steps that I've done in my own life. And for me, I found the kind of like a new level of peace over the last few years once I've begun to understand the sort of hold my childhood had on me and done some what I call inner child work. So I talk you through that in the book a lot. I'm not perfect. Who is? Nobody's perfect. Nobody's calm all of the time. I still have eruptions of anger now, but I feel very much sort of a peace on this journey now. So I really hope to share that with you. And if any of this has spoken to you, the book is out next week. I'll pop a little pre-order link up there. If you click that, you'll head on through to it. But I'd love to talk to you about this more, so do leave a comment. If this also interested you, then hit the subscribe button, and I'll speak to you next week. Thanks ever so much for tuning in. Bye.